Ted Hathaway, who's the CEO of Oldcastle Building Envelope, David Hurd, who's principal, responsible for the Los Angeles and San Francisco offices of Buro Happold, and we have Steve McConnell, who is the managing partner of NBBJ, along with Ravi. And you just heard Ravi give his presentation on innovation with some, I think he's opened up some fascinating zones for us to explore fully, because there's implications for every one of us in the world of design, and I think also in our personal lives and as leaders for that matter. The format that we'll use, I'm going to give them an opportunity to make an opening statement in response to Ravi's presentation, but also to have their own kind of personal take on innovation right now under this theme of creating innovation value. And then we'll be in dialogue with you for the remaining of this period. It should be pretty interesting. So I'm going to start off with Ted Hathaway. Ted, what's your opening shot?
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone slept well and enjoying California weather. It's not free. There's a surcharge on your hotel bill for weather today. I think my view on Ravi's presentation is that, and throughout the day and a half we've been together, is that the climate for innovation is welcomed. I mean, who in the room wouldn't want to be innovative? Who in the room wouldn't want to work with innovative people? And yet, the role we play in our industry is one where the ultimate customer doesn't seem to be particularly interested in innovation, and that's the owner. The time I've spent with developers and large real estate owners is that they are reluctant to change. And so I would say to Ravi, the clients that you've had are very motivated to change. And I wonder why in our industry there isn't that keen motivation for innovation. So maybe I'll use the example of Boeing. And Boeing obviously innovates periodically with new aircraft. 777 was designed on a 3D platform. 787, much more advanced aircraft designed in a collaborative manner with many different inputs and teams. And yet when we go about building something, we don't generally emphasize collaboration. We emphasize conflict and adversarialism. So I just would ask the question, how do we get the people that aren't in this room to embrace change? Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Let's move over to Steve.
All right, thank you. Jonathan said I had 5 minutes to share some thoughts about innovation. And, you know, I could tell some cool stories. I think we all probably have some pretty cool stories about things going on in our practices related to innovation. We're involved in some really neat things, prefabricated hospitals, for example, innovation that's enabling our work at Google, computational design that's enabling small, remarkable teams to do things that were unimaginable just a few years ago, and connecting proof at concept and performance. But rather than tell those stories, and maybe some things come up in the Q&A, I'd just like to maybe level set a little bit how we're thinking about innovation at our firm. And maybe that begins with, again, opinions, viewpoints. What is innovation? And we're thinking a lot about innovation isn't invention. Invention is something new, something very new that it maybe isn't completely adapted. But innovation fundamentally involves things that are highly adapted, but are being combined in new and unique ways. And that it's a break from the past, but somehow connected to a historical context. So that's interesting. Why is it important? Pretty basic question, but here's why I think it's important. And Jim alludes to it in his opening. It's all about value creation. And more specifically, new value, creating new value. And if we do that, then we're relevant. And if we're relevant, you know, there's an endless world of opportunities available to us. So we want to be very much on point with that. So how are we creating an environment for innovation, which also ties to some of your thoughts in the talk this morning? I think at the top of the list is culture building. the very deliberate, very proactive set of strategies and ideas that we bring to building a culture that enables fertile ground for innovation. I don't think you can schedule innovation, but I think you can create an environment where it can pop and where remarkable things can happen. So diverse thinkers, a culture with the freedom to explore, fostering creative laboratories are examples of that. Some really smart friends at Harvard Business School instruct us that accountability, when greater than control, equals entrepreneurship. And I think control plays into this whole issue of innovation in some intriguing and maybe some counterintuitive ways. So that's definitely on our minds in a big way. How do we elevate accountability dramatically above control? And how does control play out through our practice? So building on that, this network organization that we aim to create, that we're building, that we're actively developing, is a key part of the strategy to an innovation culture. So more links, not layers, being very intentional with the informal network, and proactive with not just the internal aspect of the network that connects our offices around the world and all of the activities, but also in a new way, proactive with the external network. And looking past, as was discussed yesterday, traditional modes of ownership in the building of that external network. Basically, building a bigger network is part of creating more of that fertile ground for things to spark. I think there's some important methods and attitudes that support the way we think about innovation: greater variance, rapid prototyping, 3D printing, one-to-one testing, lots of iteration, of course visualization. There was some great stuff on that. Keeping R&D connected to the work is very important, allowing for uncertainty within the routine, and seeing old things new ways, and bringing new people to old ideas. And I have to digress for just a second, because I was talking to Valerian at the break yesterday, and he said something that I thought was really interesting. And it plays right into this bringing new people to old ideas. And if you think about Lisa's talk and open sourcing and all that represented, Valerian made the observation, if I may report, that this is in a way, this technology is enabling a return to rural life. And you think, well, what do you mean by that? What's behind rural life? Well, I've spent some time in some very rural, underdeveloped communities. And there's powerful relationships. There's not a lot of stuff. There's deep meaning and experience. And this technological revolution, in a way, and these social networks are striving for that, sometimes superficially, other times less so. But it's a big circle, and the evolution of people, in a way, is not something that's just offset with a few years of technological innovation. So I really enjoyed that connection, and I wanted to connect to that little sidebar. So just to maybe conclude my opening comment here, how are we aiming our innovation, and I'm going to use Eric's term, performance weapon. That was another sidebar last night. I really like that idea of a performance weapon, and I think innovation is a performance weapon. And in my mind, it's at the intersection of relevance and what lights our fire as designers. That's where we're aiming that weapon. If we think about globalization, then it's dealing with delivery, efficiency, network solutions. If we think about automation, we're aiming it at computational design, at really conveying proof of concept on performance. And if we think about the experience economy, which isn't a panacea per se, but it's really important to what we're all about, then for us it's designing to provoke change. And that's the passion, that's the dream of where we want to drive innovation. So those are my thoughts for the comment here.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let's go to David Hurd. What's your take on innovation and value delivered, David?
I'd like to make 3 points, actually. And as the other guys have been talking, I've been mulling over which point would I cover first. All 3 points, I think, address issues that have come up over the last, this morning and yesterday afternoon. The first point I'd like to make, and it came up in Kurt's comments, discussion last night, is this mix of expertise versus generalism. So in our practice, we cover all forms of consulting engineering, and that's roughly 25 different expertises. And what we find creates the most innovative environments is the combination of experts and generalists. And one thing I've taken away from Ravi's presentation is that I would call them less generalists and maybe more engineering heroes. And what I mean by that is that we need the depth of expertise. We need people who truly understand their discipline, whether it's structural engineering or acoustics or fire engineering. But we also equally importantly need engineers or leaders or heroes that can actually pull together all of those different expertise disciplines to deliver either to an architect or a contractor or a client an integrated solution. So for us, in creating a truly innovative environment, the generalist leader or hero and the expert are equally valuable and equally important. What we do in the expertise, we try to push the expertise level absolutely as far as you can. So, for example, we're probably one of the few large structural engineering practices that actually, in LA, 30% of our turnover in structural engineering is in sculptures, in art pieces. And we do that not because I'm going to retire on it, but because fundamentally we can absolutely push the boundaries of structural engineering with art. Pieces that just, in theory, shouldn't be able to stand up. And that requires huge amounts of modeling and virtual prototyping, which you can then bring back into the more traditional sectors. So continually being on that bleeding edge of the expertise and how you then bring that back into the center. So that's my first point, expertise and balancing expertise and generalism. My second point is global versus local. And we've had a lot of comments made about the fact that we're in a global market. And I was reading an article yesterday about a global architect at the moment who is struggling. And they were making a comment, no, it's not about being global, it's about being local. We have offices all over the world and we do local work. And I think that's missing the point. The point is that you should be global and local. In other words, that you are globally networked. So we have 1,500 people worldwide in 30 offices, which are all networked together. And we actively promote bringing different offices in to work with us. So even though I might be doing a project here in LA, I may bring people in from London because they have a particular expertise. That to me is about being global. However, if I'm doing a project in China, then in fact I have an office in Beijing and I have a partner in Beijing, then I bring that person in to provide the local expertise. So I think it's understanding when you want to have a global network and the importance of that, and the importance of having people locally who can maybe provide interface or whatever. And the flexibility and the agility that's required. So we rightly or wrongly, we don't necessarily draft up huge business plans to create new opportunities. We see them and we grasp them. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they're successful, but we are great believers in taking risk and managing risk and seizing the opportunities, because we see that's where we get innovation from. And then my third point is about technology. And it was, I think Victor mentioned yesterday about the issue of Autodesk and Revit and how dominant that is in our industry. And for us, that is a huge issue, because we probably have 20, maybe 30 different pieces of software, and how the hell do you integrate them all? And so what we've been looking at is, well, looking more at BIM as a data-centric database system. So where you may build a design in Revit or a different package, translate that information into a database. Once you've got it into a database, you can then use that information with any piece of software. So it's more important about understanding how to create the database than how you necessarily get the information in there in the first place. And I think as an industry, we still totally undervalue data. A lot of our work is around creating designs. We put up a building, and then quite often we're running away as quickly as we can. And that's partly because clients don't necessarily value our sort of post-occupancy services and what we can add to a building for the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years, however long it's there. And how, if you actually create the right database at the start of a project during design, that can then form the basis of collecting data and optimizing a building through its whole life. And I'm not just talking about energy, I'm talking about people flow, that you understand how the building's actually being used, right through to security and the maintenance and some of the more traditional issues. And even how you then deconstruct the building at the end. Because a lot of our work now is in renovation, and the first thing we have to do is go into a building or onto a site and understand it. And the more we can build data into the whole life cycle of a project or a building, the more real useful information we will have.
Thank you, David. I'd like to go to Ravi for a minute. Ravi's just given us a pretty compelling presentation, and he's the author of Predictable Magic, and just had an opportunity to hear our other three panelists. And Ravi, before we go to the floor and open up the discussion from the floor, what other comments on design and value would you like to make?
In listening, it's always, of course, difficult to give, any feedback to well-established, profound professionals who have all their who everyone has significant accomplishments. So take it as you may. But in listening, I get a sense that there are barriers to innovation in the way of the clients, and how do you address that? Well, I think some of the tools I've shown actually do help tremendously. That when clients understand what the value creation is to the ultimate person who leases, who visits their building, and how you can create increased value perception, is just a latent opportunity. I mean, it's out there. It's out there, and I know in many fields it's not being captured. And you go right back to the roots of that. Can you show increases in value perception? I think you can through the same tools that are used when we do competitive scenarios for cars and other experiences. I mean, that's absolutely there. I can well envision that you show the personas, you show the process, you show the journey, and you talk about terms of value creation. That what is the sense of attachment that you create for someone who's coming to lease space for the first time? How do you attract them and engage them and bond them, and in their mind have what an anthropologist named Bob Deutsch, who teaches at MIT, he called it a psychosthetic connect. What you do is that as people are going through and looking at different scenarios, they're playing them out in their mind, that when you do the process right, people have a psychosthetic connect, and that's when they stop seeing themselves outside of the offering. So you're looking at houses to buy or rent, and the one that you actually move on is the one that you stop seeing the house and you start seeing yourself living in that house. And it's that connection that creates increased value. And the other part that in listening that I think could help is that when you look at innovation, you have to temper innovation with the revolution versus evolution challenge, so that how far can we move the needle on people to where it's disruptive and they don't understand it. So it's that 1 foot in tradition and 1 foot in innovation that seems to be the sweet spot, that the ability to give people relevance of what they know and something extra. So and what happens in that is that people feel comfortable. You get them to where they're comfortable and they're invited in, and then they get that sense of empowerment that they left with something that they didn't have. That's part of that hero's journey. That's part of that gifting process. So, but you've got to get them comfortable first, and we've seen that people, as time is going on, as we said, in India and China, they're very advanced on design, but it may be that in North America, people are much more set in their ways. But still, how much do we move them? We can, each time we can select from a palette of innovations and shortlist that down to things that are really meaningful and powerful, that don't disrupt their orientation. So if we're disorienting them, or we're back to that mantra, it's how it makes you feel about yourself. And what happens is that if people don't understand the innovation, they feel inferior and they push away. So by empowering them and making them feel smart and feel empowered and bonding, there's just a wide open door right into kind of their hearts and heads. And that goes from client presentations all the way down to the person who leases space. I hope that helps.
Very much. Thank you, Ravi. Could we have the panel please stand? I'm going to have you so that everybody can see you here. Thank you. So a question occurs to me as we talk about adding value and scaling value to opportunity and staying alert for innovation that increases value. Is it possible that by not doing some of these things that we're unconsciously destroying value? And are we destroying value at our peril as professionals? And Steve, I'd like to ask you to respond to this, and then we'll open it up to the floor.
Okay, so I'll just try to be brief. I think there's an absolute appropriate place in the marketplace for commoditization. And commoditization isn't necessarily new value creation, but that's not where we want to live. When I think about clients and the role of clients, as Ravi was talking about, I immediately think about, okay, we're professional service providers. And what is the role of that client? And maybe just to tie a bow on that thought, for me, the client fit is a really big deal. Does our client fundamentally want to be better at what they're doing? And if they do, we want to work with them. And if they don't, we have no interest, absolutely no interest. So not getting confused about client fit, understanding that we are oriented toward new value creation, and to do that, we have to have the right relationship with the clients. And frankly, as a design professional, we want to provoke people. We want to unsettle them from their patterns. Mm-hmm. We want to be even aggressive about that. And so to empathize with those people, the question we ask ourselves is, what are people trying to do to be better in their work, and how can design support that? So those are some top-of-mind notions.
Ted Hathaway, do you have a response to that?
Well, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that there's technology that's readily available that various communities and constituencies aren't embracing. So as a manufacturer, as a supplier of an engineered solution, if we were more BIM-centric, we would be extremely more efficient in how we supply material on a very cost-effective basis. I give you a very elementary example. Everyone here designs windows with dimensions, length, width, and depending on those dimensions, we get a yield when we cut that dimension out of a piece of float glass. So you may have a look and an aesthetic that bears no relation to the efficiency of cutting those windows out of a piece of float glass. So if we were able to communicate with you a modification in your dimensions that would enhance our yield, because we throw away 20% of what we produce. That's a huge waste. So there's the need for trust, and we're a billion-dollar company. We do large and small projects all over North America. We like to work with people that trust us, but there doesn't seem to be at least in my limited experience, which is running at about 25 years, a growing momentum of trusting the manufacturer to collaborate on an efficient execution. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I know at the general contractor level, it's probably a lost cause. But unfortunately, given what's happened in the industry, the general contractor has more power than anyone in the room, in my opinion. And the owner has gravitated away from this group to the general contractor and the consultants. And the consultants, in my opinion, are there to protect the legal issues. So I think there's tremendous technology out there. I mean, I just don't know if we're really leveraging it. And I'm kind of when I go to New York and talk to owners, they're kind of looking at me like, well, maybe, but we really like to bid everyone against everyone. We really like adversarialism. We think it brings out the best in people. So that's my view as the vendor.
So evolution is not bringing us through. The innovation isn't advancing fast enough to satisfy you.
Well, I mean, imagine if Boeing went out and bid the engine against the wings and said, you guys can't talk to each other. All right, so you guys go build the wing and you guys go build the engines and I hope it works. And I mean, imagine, I mean, you know, now someone would argue, well, that's, you know, Boeing and they're going to build 250 787s, so they have repeatability and they can afford to collaborate and it's a long-run relationship, whereas most of us in this room are building one building at a time. But trust versus adversarialism. And adversarialism costs us, as a supplier, huge sums of money because, you know, we have to bid the number higher to protect ourselves. And if we really had trust and a more honest relationship with everyone at the table, we would be more forthcoming in how we could save everyone money. But we don't trust because you don't trust, and it's that classic kind of endless do loop where we end up being adversarial. And yeah, I mean, a vicious circle versus virtuous circle. I mean, pick your favorite analogy. I prefer virtuous circles. They're much more fun. So.
Who would like to ask the next question?
On the matrix you were showing, what were the values of the X and Y? I couldn't read the...
Well, in gross terms, just think of highest level of self-actualization vertically and interaction horizontally. And the balance is that you can actually increase interactivity and lose people. So there's a real art form to using the map and understanding what are the right levels. So the flip camera, that actually went lower level interactivity and higher level of self-actualization and nailed $1 billion market. So it's understanding where to move within that. But in gross terms, if you just look through crosshairs, you say higher levels of interactivity, which means senses. You know, are you adding senses? Are you adding bells, whistles, senses, this type of thing? And that, you know, how emotionally engaging, self-actualizing is it vertically, low versus high? And then you start working in gross terms like that, and then you start going finer and finer, and you start segmenting, you start building maps for individual scenarios, and you start to see deeper and deeper about what happens.
Robbie, I have a question for you about, it seemed like a lot of the examples you used, and Flip is a great example of a small company that nailed a market, sold it, and then Cisco screwed it up, right, essentially. Killed it, whatever way you want to describe what happened.
They actually didn't reinvent themselves, right? They changed the consumer, they addressed the consumer. The consumer moved on the map, the consumer moved up or right, and they became an obsolete product.
But the company also now no longer exists, which I thought was interesting in your
how
few companies still exist.
Yeah, and actually I presented at Cal State Long Beach, I think a year before they shut down, and somebody asked me the question about that, and I said, well, if they don't reinvent themselves, they're not going to exist a year from now, and it turned out to be true.
Right.
They didn't.
So that was actually, we had this great conversation with Ken Sanders and the guys from SHP Leading Design last night about some of the large software companies, you know, in our industry and outside our industry, that are growing through acquisitions of small, smart companies, but they're not able to do internal innovation. And so where you see there are companies that are large, that are able to do innovation internally without trying to do acquisitions and glue people together, what's the culture of a larger company that can do repeat innovation versus seeing it at small companies? If you could explain that.
So our largest client is probably Unilever, whose turnover is, I think, 60 billion euros. And so I would say it's fairly uniform that you've got to run a balance of breaking out an isolated independent group that pretty much runs like a small company. The challenge is, of course, you need funding. You need funding, and in the case of Unilever, each value that we created had to be attached to a business proposal and go into a venture group, an in-house venture group. So you're always within that corporation. So you've got to have the autonomy to do what you need to do, but you've got to have the tools to compel that understanding of the value upwardly. In those cases, we did 3 business plans, all which got funded for anywhere from $1 million to 20 million euros, and the business plans are basically based all on psychosthetics, all on the transformation of insight into value. So I mean that's how we do it, and we're working with Life Technologies, a $4 billion client, and then we work, with I don't know what size Intel is, or SC Johnson is one of our big clients. They're $9 billion. But we've always got that challenge. They'll give you a certain amount of autonomy, but they're going to hold the purse strings.
Are there any generalizations that you could make about the size of organizations and as a factor in innovation?
What I would say is that the ability to distill and nutshell your value for whether it's a startup, because they'll have either angel investors or friends and family investors, or they'll have buyers. They all need that nutshell that proves to them that there's true insight and value creation that's meaningful, all the way up to the CEO who will give you an hour of a $4 billion company, and he's asking those same types of questions. Mm-hmm. So it's that ability to really prove out, and we do it visually because we're visual people, but we find that when you do it visually and you have the backup of all the research and all the data, and you know your subject matter, you can answer their hard questions. So I think for us, it's that it really is taking them through their own hero's journey. When you actually look at what we do, we build a hero's journey for the CEO. We build a hero's journey for all of our stakeholders. We don't always tell our clients we're doing that, but we go through this process of actually looking at what's their hero's journey, how do we attract, engage, get them to adopt and start to evangelize even our value proposition or our design proposal. And what happens also that's transformed over the years is that through kind of this letting process, egos drop, people become focused, and then it comes full circle to where we're being asked, okay, and what's your recommendation to us? Where before it became this, you're talking about this adversarial relationship. We say left, and somebody says right. But it's interesting that kind of by letting it go and letting the tools do the work for themselves, it just has always come full circle. What do you recommend? And you guys know this better than we do, and why should we go this way?
Thank you for that.
Was going through my mind as I was listening is that RFPs kill creativity. Because
by RFPs, you mean request for proposals?
Correct, because by the time we get the proposal, the RFP, and let's say we get the award, the client's already has a schedule, has a timeline, has a building in mind, or and we do have creative people that do really cool stuff within the projects. But I think the creativity, maybe, Ravi, you could talk about it. But it sounds like a lot of the endeavors are a creative endeavor from the beginning with you to find better pathways. But on our design project as architects, I wrote a note to myself to think about working with our clients between the RFPs on the creative process, because maybe that's where visionary work can happen. A lot of times at the beginning of the project, so what if, and they said, well, we don't have time, the project needs to get out of the ground. So,
I mean, I think I'm not sure I wholly agree. I think there is huge amounts of innovation that can be created once you've won the project. I think there is obviously a continual challenge for us to create a client base that enables us to get into a client before an RFP process. I'm a little bit more optimistic than Ted on where things are going, and partly from my experience in Europe, where the dominance of the GC has been there for probably a lot longer. When I left the UK 4 years ago, nearly 50% of our turnover was where we were employed by the GC. And what was interesting is how GCs had adapted their role, and the really successful ones weren't bidding to vendors. They had their preferred suppliers and their preferred architects and engineers, and that's who they would bid. That's who they would work with, and therefore they had those depth of relationships that meant that when the architect was deciding on the size of the window, the facade supplier was in the same room. Mm-hmm. So I sort of, with my rose-tinted glasses, sort of feel that is, I've seen it done successfully. We're moving far more towards a design and build procurement route, or PPP, and I'd like to think that what I've seen before will be replicated here. That the vendors will actually move up the chain. The other issue about clients is, I think you can find innovation with all clients. You just got to find what their true desires are, whether it's finance, whether it's long-term business goals or whatever. And I tend to find that certainly on the projects that I'm involved with, almost every project you can find some sweet spot that creates a level of innovation. And I'll give you one example. We have a client who is definitely not wanting to necessarily push the boundaries, which on the face of it, you think, well, maybe that's not somebody I really want to work with. Their sweet spot was they don't like spending money. And in actual fact, that desire to not spend money has created the innovation, in that we have an atrium in this project which we are passively smoke venting. That's saving them $1 million. They're paying us $150,000. They're saving $1 million. And what we're doing is using virtual prototyping and computational fluid dynamics and egress modeling, which we have developed internally to demonstrate that you can passively smoke vent this atrium and save them $1 million. So what I find interesting with that particular project is, well, at the start of it, the client was very clearly not wanting to push the boundaries until he found out how much money he could save, and then we have a solution which, to my knowledge, hasn't been done in the US to date. So I think you can still find the innovation nuggets, even with clients that don't necessarily have it on the surface.
Steve, would you have an opposing view on that, or a similar view on that?
Is it okay if I go back to the RFP question for a moment? I just don't agree. I think the RFP is an opportunity to change the game and define it in terms that ultimately have to resonate with the client, but also can drive at that fit that you're after. I mean, an example, we got an RFP for a really sexy project. We scored out all the traditional means by which we might try to succeed and secure that project, and there was no way that would add up in our favor. And so redefining the game for us meant a completely out-of-the-box approach toward all the methods that would drive at innovation for this client. And I think by any reasonable measure, you would have said, no, okay, we're at the dance, but we're not there. Well, we won the job, and it's Google's first build-to-suit campus, and it was all about innovation. Okay,
when you received the RFP for the Gates Foundation, could you read in that RFP that this was a tremendous opportunity for the firm to innovate?
I mean, absolutely. It's a learning organization. And the strategy there had a lot to do with both meaningful partnership with the client in the creation of their vision while pushing the ultimate potential of a performance environment. I guess one other thing I wanted to share, because Boeing has come up a few times, and
Yes.
we've done a very big project for Boeing, and I think crisis provokes innovation. So whether it's the Great Recession, whether it's a company in crisis, it can provoke significant innovation. In the case of Boeing, there was an earthquake a few years ago, and they had a crisis of space utilization. And lo and behold, they thought, my gosh, we have these huge assembly environments, some of the largest single-floor buildings in the world. They have these trusses that run down the center. They're 65 feet wide and 1,500 feet long. And can't we get all our engineering staff in there? And we won the job. And the design problem was how to bring these two cultures together. And yeah, there's a creative set of environmental graphics and physical details within these environments that have been published. But using an approach toward workplace design and bringing those two groups together, in some cases, engineers who said, I haven't set foot in a factory in 30 years. Well, when we started the job, it took 22 days to build a 737. Now, when we finished, it took 11. And now it's actually quite a factor below that. 5 or 6
I think.
is 9 days.
Well, it may be, that's the last I heard over a year
Yeah.
ago.
And before they started, and this is about trust, and it's not about the supply line, but it's about the trust between these constituencies, and a lot is coming out of that. Fabricators can meet with engineers within a minute on the floor and study issues. So anyway, an interesting sidebar about a big company that we've been talking about.
Before we leave that sidebar, Steve McKay.
We have found very recently, I can't tell you we did this, I actually can't tell you we had the courage to do this 5, 7 years ago when the economy was easier. But we have found very recently that the jobs that we've won, we've actually ignored the RFP. I would rather stand up and show the value of our firms to a client and what we think is the right thing to do, which is why you should get hired, and not just jump through the predictable hoops. Some of it, I think, comes because there are a lot more players, and it's actually, I find it a little harder to get directly to the client. There's a lot of people involved now, so I actually find RFPs can be horribly predictable. And so just very recently we've found that we had to do that, and even with clients that we've known very well for many, many years, clients like Boeing in the Northwest, we are finding that we have to bring to the RFP everything that's in between the lines based on what we think is the right thing to do. So
Thank you.
I think it's very interesting, and part of me really hates it because I don't know where it's going to go, and part of me actually thinks that it's a huge value for the design industry because it has forced us to leave that comfort zone.
Let's go down to Dan. Thank you for that, Steve.
It's 3 parts. One is you mentioned you involved yourself in research and development, R&D. So my questions are, how do you determine what that budget is? Well, first of all, do you have a budget, and do you keep to that budget? How do you determine annually what that budget is? And then how do you determine the focus of your R&D efforts? Is that something that you have, like a time frame, a window that you want to come out with something concrete, something sellable perhaps, or something that advances your mission within a time frame?
I'm not sure if it's a TV program that's available in the US, but in about 5 years ago there was a program called the Dragon's Den in the UK, where you'd have 4 or 5 entrepreneurs, stack of cash sat next to them, and you could do a 3-minute pitch of an idea, and they would then question you and decide whether they thought it was a good idea, and they would invest in that company. we thought it was a great idea. So we actually implemented that within our practice. We set up a board of 5 partners. They didn't have the stack of cash set next to them, and then we invited anyone in the practice to put together a proposal for a research project with a budget, and they would then filter down to probably 30 proposals, and then we'd invite those people, those engineers in from wherever they were in the practice, whatever grade they were, to present their idea. And we found this a great opportunity to engage with everyone in the practice, whatever grade they were, and they had an opportunity to come in, present to senior members of the practice, and potentially get their idea funded. We have a turnover of about $150 million a year globally, and up until the Great Recession, we were probably spending about somewhere between $2 and $3 million a year on research and development. We have cut it back more recently. Well, what we've done is we've changed the focus. We tried to do more research and development through our projects, and that's why we were sort of always pushing to find new ways of doing things, because then we can develop things with clients, because then you're also getting real-time feedback. So for us, it's not so much about driving it top down. It's almost bottom up, in collecting great ideas, sifting through them, and then channeling them. I'd say one of our failings has been that we can end up sometimes taking on a research project and not truly understanding how far we need to go. So, for example, I mentioned when I was talking earlier, our idea of creating a data-centric database. We actually did that through LA. We spent the best part of $500,000, and the more money we spent, the more we realized how big the problem was. And what it's at the moment, we're at a point where we've realized if we truly want to move this forward, we need to find other collaborators to work with. So, but as part of, we set aside a certain amount of money. We don't necessarily set huge ambitious targets of what we want to achieve out of it, and therefore some things pass, some things fail.
Ted Hathaway, is your organization at Oldcastle working with some of the firms on research and development? Are there any collaborations? Is it formal or informal?
I'd say it's more informal. We have funded, at Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture, we funded a building intelligence project to try and bring in think tanks, and they've hosted them around the world, and bringing in people just to exchange ideas in an open forum. We've invited our competition to participate, which was part of our holistic approach, is that we wanted fresh and new ideas. But I'd say right now, the emphasis is finding work for us has really been our primary focus. I think the time to have been focused on this was in the good days when we had plenty of work and we could have been, thinking about the future. We weren't really thinking about that cliff that showed up in 2008, and I don't know how many of you in the room were smart enough to know it was coming. I wasn't smart enough to know it was coming. But I know it's here for a long time, and it's forced us to rethink a lot of the ways we do business. So,
I have a different kind of question to ask right now, Kurt Fentress. If I could ask you a question about, last night you gave us a presentation that focused on your high-end buildings, on airports, and you showed us innovation in several different categories, but I also understand that you're doing some data centers, some higher-end data centers with certain clients, and I'm wondering how you take something like that, relatively vanilla architecture, and how do you bring innovation and new solutions to that category, and is that satisfying for the people in your firm who are otherwise working on these sexy things?
We're currently engaged with just one client that's excited about making their data centers interesting. and more exciting than just a big box with lots of things going on inside. So that is interesting, I think, for the designers in our office because of that. The key to those buildings, of course, is how efficient can you make them work and how little energy can you use to keep the equipment inside cool. But it's not the most interesting building type to us, except there are a lot of things about planning how these parks of these data centers are going to be developed from a sustainable standpoint, and what we can do from a sustainable standpoint to make the buildings better. So it's really much more, I think, engaging to our people from a technical standpoint. But I think everybody's interested in high yield, high energy, high performance buildings, you know. High performance is really the word or phrase I was searching for there. High performance means that they get more out of it and it costs them less to operate. And so that, I think, today is one of the trends that we see. And it's whether the building is performing in a way that draws people into it. There was, you know, I was looking at the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and there was an article in there about parking garages in Miami and how they have businesses in the parking garages and discotheques. Well, that dates me, doesn't it? Places to dance and go in the evenings. And so they were talking about the parking structures as being civic places. And I thought that was really innovative and remarkable in a sense. So I think there's opportunities in all different building types to do things that are high yield and high value, and you know, we just have to be inventive to find those.
You don't necessarily have to lower your design standards. In fact, you can find areas to innovate in those zones that might be beneficial to the firm as a whole.
I think that's right, and I think the comment about the opportunity to innovate is when the people don't want to spend money. I mean, most of the projects that we've had through, you know, our office that were interesting and innovative were exactly those kind of things where people came in and it was an impossible site, an impossible budget, and we sat down and figured out something that worked and had great value to them because it worked. And it didn't mean that they suddenly spent a lot more money. I mean, the Denver airport was $136 a square foot. And, you know, it has this fabric roof that it encloses a gigantic space. At the time it was built, it was the largest fabric roof enclosure of heated and air-conditioned space in the world. And it was out of a desperation situation of creating a building within a schedule and a budget that seemed impossible at the time, that we came up with that solution. And so I just think that, you know, this necessity is the mother of invention, you know. The other thing, we find ourselves working a lot more with manufacturers, and whether it's design build or whether it's the delivery method is a CMGC or some other method, we find ourselves working more and more with the manufacturers of the products. And the other day it dawned on us that we only have one job in our entire office that's a bid job, and it's a trend. The trend is it's either CMGC or some form of that, or some form of design assist where the construction companies come in early. Now, that doesn't mean they don't beat you up as a supplier, but you know, we're finding it as a big trend, a lot more trust in the industry. And I think this new thing that we're having to learn how to work with is how we all work together with these BIM models and how we share those up and down the line through the contractors and subcontractors and suppliers and everyone else. So,
thank you for that. We have time for one more question.
I'm actually kind of curious. I heard a somewhat alarming, it made me think last month as we worked with a research firm And the phrase they say, with the statement they basically made to us is, in our industry, in our design and A&E industry, as we, I think, struggle with this idea of research in our firms. How is it funded? What's the value return? Why are we doing it? They said, we are professional researchers. That's what we do. And most architects and engineers, even if they do the research, have no idea what to do with the data. It's a skill set on its own that we as an industry have decided to adopt and try and make value out of. Oh, we do research, we can tell you, what the predictors are afterwards. And I'm curious to hear, because on one side we've talked a little about in a large firm, there's a small group of people who can clearly learn. And in another model, we have the idea that it's the dragon's den and bring all the ideas and we'll help you establish them. As a firm, we kind of have a hybrid model of that. So I'm kind of interested in all the panels' kind of idea that of what do you do with the data, and are we really being a little egotistical that we actually know what to do with the data we think we are collecting? So are we pretending that we know what to do with this research just because it's a buzzword? We do research, and so I'm kind of curious to hear what people are doing with it.
With your permission, how I'd like to handle that is to give each of our panelists an opportunity to give a brief response to that, and then to make your own parting shot. And okay, and so together we've got 5 minutes, and it's not very much time, but let's see if we can do justice to the question.
Okay, well, two thoughts. One, I think this is where a basis of critical mass and resources is very important, and perhaps something a very small practice can't compete with. We are certainly enculturating and recruiting, and we have on staff, Rotman Business School grads, anthropologists, other designers from other disciplines. So that interdisciplinary makeup is critical to the core competencies that say, yeah, here's how you connect the data to consequence in the work. So that's very real. My parting shot is that, kind of back to some of the things that were discussed here, I think bottom up, it's all about creating a culture and a fertile ground where very amazing and unexpected things can happen. And having firms that embrace that, allow for it, and through that comes really innovative things. But that alone is not guided. And so if we think from the other direction, we need a strategy. And the strategy has to inform the investments. And when I think about the investment we make in R&D, and it has to be connected to the work, I think what we struggle with is, well, how do I fund this island called R&D? It's not part of our traditional business model. We're not publicly capitalized. How the hell do we do that? But we can't miss the opportunity for how deep and rich and complete the experience of integrating the approach to innovation can be within the work we do. And if I think about our investment in that, my knees get weak. It's massive, and it's sort of the core of who we are as a legacy practice, and it's on so many dimensions that we're investing in that way. So I think if you hit it from both ends, some pretty amazing things will happen.
Thank you, Steve McConnell. David?
I'd agree with what you're saying, and I think there is a slight element of ego in it, and I would say for us, the research and development is trying to achieve two things. One, we are trying to develop new ideas and new products. So, for example, the egress modeling I mentioned before was a piece of software that started as a research project. It was tested, validated, and we now use it. However, for each one of those, there's probably a whole host of others that collected a whole load of data that never went anywhere. However, what we gain probably more out of it is the culture that you create, the energy, the fact that our engineers want to innovate, and that's where they start from in thinking about projects. That probably creates more value than maybe a piece of software that we develop. My parting shot is I actually I moved to California 4 years ago. I'd barely ever been to the US, and I arrived in May 2008, just before everything went off the edge of a cliff. And there's no doubt about it to me that the crisis has created huge innovation. And whether it's responding to an RFP in a different way, all of us know that we can't do business like we did 4 years ago. And to me, that has created a hugely innovative environment, whether it's that the client comes to us and says, I want it done cheap, but I want it innovative, and that creates a different way of thinking. I think we are in a very innovative environment, far more than we were 4 years ago. I think we continue to beat ourselves up about it, and we worry about China and India, but I think we are actually achieving huge amounts here in the US, and that's why I'm personally here and not in China or India or somewhere else. I decided to come here because I saw something and I believe it's here, and I think the crisis has truly created a great opportunity.
Thank you, David. Ted Hathaway.
So I was here 2 years ago and there were fewer people in the room, and it was raining cats and dogs. And we had a different set of speakers, and we were talking about inefficiency and the lack of commonality of technology. So I left with a little bit of an epiphany, which was that maybe we ought to be doing more assisting our constituents with looking at energy and as it relates to facade choices. And so we went out and we picked a technology company called IBM. Some of you might have bought the stock. If you have, it's doing quite well. And we've innovated with a BIM platform to provide energy modeling and allowing clients to look at different substrates and different curtain wall designs, and to be able to do that at the front end of design conception. And so we're trying to differentiate ourselves by using digitalization and the access to digital data and making people design smart building envelopes. So I look forward to talking to all of you individually over the coming decade about BIM IQ.
Thank you. Ted, thanks for that. Ravi, you get the last word.
Oh, that's a good place. Thank you. So the question about are we all qualified to leverage the research, and you know, the answer is yes. It may be because of ego, it may not, but the answer is yes. No one else can manifest the research into action other than the creative teams. And the question for me is that when you talk about research, are you talking about data or information? And research, research has two tracks. One is a qualitative type of research, and the other is quantitative. And this is something that we fight all the time. In the blend, where we got involved and where we are involved is that by being a component of the research, and actually we're the ones who are directing the research because we know what we want to get out of it. So while we don't have a research team in-house, we have our strategists and our designers part of that research, and they bring back the value, they bring back the insight, and they are the ones who can extract from that research and then basically propose a strategy. So the point of strategy is critical to what you do with the research. Research, for some reason, seems to get a ton of credibility, because there's a link to this quantitative analysis, and the minute you say quantitative, that's in my eyes,
it's got
that's
mystique.
Yeah, it's got a big CYA attached to it, which is that the numbers said it was the right thing to do. When you start doing qualitative, someone's got to give an opinion, someone's got to give a judgment, someone's got to interpret it and manifest that. So the research is a good thing. There's no one more qualified than the creative people to use it. In a parting shot, I would pick up on one of the other panelists said is that, in studying the design cultures and what's happening in the world, the United States is really a very, very unique culture of innovation and creativity. I don't think anyone really knows exactly why why it's occurred or why it's occurring. It's multicultural. So we get the best from the world coming here. So it is truly a melting pot of brilliance. And I think, you know, the opportunity is now for us to stand up and take inventory and really come to realize that there's a huge amount of leadership coming from architecture, innovation, design, technology out of the United States. And actually I put a pitch out that is now going to go even broader. I did it initially through Fast Company. And the pitch is to the design community is to start branding ourselves. Not to say designed by Archaeus, but to brand everything we do. And if it's a brochure on a piece of architecture, have it branded saying designed in USA. So the country of origin labeling is typically attached to where something is made. And what I've proposed is that we develop a country of origin label, and we actually have a website that we don't make any money from it. You just go download it. It's called designinUSA.com. And you can download the icon and use it as you would like. And that if it was developed or designed here, let's brand it and let's understand that we can design ourselves as a community. That we don't have to be isolated points of brilliance and all of us talking about our great war story, our great accomplishment. That there actually is a collective, and you're seeing that starting to occur. And I think that's the benefit of the Chinese threat more than the Indian threat, is that they're generating vast amounts of designers, architects, creative people, but the brilliance is coming here. And part of what I wanted to distinguish in our field was that we thought so many products were made in China. Well, what's made in China are typically now products that we don't want to make here. So we're making them in China, so it's actually not as bad of a thing. But there's the perception that everything is made in China and that all our jobs are going over. Well, in fact, the nature of employment is changing in the U.S. And it's more about thinking and creativity and leadership, and it's a relatively small community in the world. And my point was, okay, well, let's reach out there to the community and start branding ourselves as a community that does bring value to North America and brings value to the rest of the world. So I would invite everyone, if you're up to it, it's just designinUSA.com. All it is a logo. There's no pitch. There's nothing else in there, and it's really just something to think about. You know, if you put it all together and you think about how I see heroes, and I see everyone in this room as heroes, and design and creativity as a heroic experience in North America, well, then we should all wear a badge or put something out there that says, yeah, we're proud that it was designed here, it was created here. You know, we're a melting pot of brilliance, and let's show the world.
Thank you for that. Well, let me just say that this panel, we don't just have some great thought leaders here, but we have people who are delivering excellence. Let's thank them.